Everyone for joining us. I'm Steve Burns. I'm the president and CEO of the Idaho Community Foundation. And today, Judy Ramos and I are going to give you an update about the foundation and what we're doing for Idaho. And Judy is our vice president of finance and administration. And so I am going to share my screen with all of you. And all right. Can you see the?
We can see, yep, there it is.
All right, great. Well, thanks again for being here today. During this, we will mute all of your camera. We will mute all of your microphones and adjust your cameras. So if you do have any questions, up at the top of your screen, there should be a chat feature, and you can put any questions in that if you have immediate questions, or if you want to wait until the end of the presentation, we will turn everyone's cameras and microphones back on so that you can ask any questions that you might have. And just to let you know that this session is being recorded, so we will jump into it. So the first thing that we want to go over are a few of the 2022 highlights, and it was a very good year for the foundation. The first is, how much the foundation is here so that we can make grants to all 44 counties. And last year, there were up $12.3 million in grants and distributions made to almost 1,800 grants were made. And that's literally hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits across the state. It is one of the highest amounts we've ever given out in grants, the highest since 2020 when the COVID fund was in place. So $12.3 million is a real testament to all of the fund holders who have partnered with the Community Foundation over the years, and it shows the level of impact that you're all having across the state. Since 1988, the foundation has now made more than $165 million in grants, again, to all 44 counties across Idaho, and that is just an amazing number. This past year, there were 29 new funds created, including from the Shides of Idaho Falls, the Schmitz of Grangeville, and the Riggers of McCall. And so we thank them. We thank all of the other 26 new fund holders. And we also thank all of you because we now have about 670 funds that have been created over those 35 years. And it just shows you how far the foundation has come in its history. And it is our 35th anniversary. On November 10th of this year, we will be celebrating our 35th anniversary. John Ferry, who was at the time was the CEO of Boise Cascade, was really the driving force behind this. And he pulled together a group of Idahoans from across the state who wanted to have not only a community foundation, but a statewide community foundation that focused on helping Idaho communities thrive. And to think that it's now $165 million later in grants is just an incredible testament to all of that group's work. We will be having a 35th anniversary celebration in November, and so we'll be sending out reminders and invitations to that as we get closer to November. And so it's always good to start with some stories, and I'd love to tell you two stories about funds that were created this year. And one of them was by this gentleman, Nep Lynch, whose actual name is Neptune Alexander Lynch IX. And Nep grew up in Montana, and he eventually got married to Mary Ellen, and Nep was a logger. And so he started to work in logging camps, and Mary Ellen was a cook in those camps, and she was feeding all those hungry loggers. And over time, they were good business folks, and they were able to purchase a mill, and then they purchased a second mill. And they also lived for a portion of that time, for quite a bit of their time, in the community of Salmon, which is in Lemhi County, one of the most remote parts of the state. So Mary Ellen passed away a few years ago, and Nep, who is, like I mentioned, now 97 years old, he'd been taking care of his community for a long time. The picture of him at the basketball hoop there is an athletic facility that he helped to build in Salmon. And he'd been taking care of his community for a long time, and he thought, how can I continue to take care of my community? And so he set up two funds with us last year, one of them dedicated to helping out nonprofits in Lemhi County. And that fund is now going to generate at least a couple of $100,000 each and every year to help those nonprofits in that community. And to think that Salmon, as I mentioned, one of the smallest, one of the most remote communities in Idaho, to have a couple of $100,000 in extra charitable grants made each year is just incredible. What's even more incredible is that Nep, who spent part of his life in Montana, created a similar two funds in the Montana Community Foundation because he wanted to take care of those communities as well. And we are just proud to partner with Nep and his family, and the memory of Mary Ellen and what he has done, what they have done for that community. The second fund that got set up this year is the Brundage Mountain Community Fund. Brundage Mountain, which has obviously been a the ski mountain in the McCall area for decades, it was owned by a private family, and the man who was the patriarch of that family died a couple of years ago, Judd DeBoer, and the family decided that they wanted to sell Brundage. And rather than sell it to a big multinational corporation, there was a group of local people from the McCall area who bonded together and decided that they were going to buy Brundage Mountain, and so that they could keep it the local ski mountain. And they wanted to send a message to the community that Brundage was still there for the community. It was the community's mountain, and it was going to continue to do that. And so one of the first things that they did was they set up a fund with the Idaho Community Foundation, and now it's going to benefit nonprofit organizations in both Valley and Adams County. And again, we are delighted and proud to be working with Brundage Mountain for this year. I'm sorry, but the start of their fund this year. So funds are one part of the story, but obviously grants are another part of the story. And so two just really cool grants that were made this year is one of the funds that we have is with the Chobani Company, and Chobani is the manufacturer of yogurt. They have a huge plant down in the Twin Falls area, and they wanted to demonstrate their commitment to that area, and so they created a fund with us, and they have a group of a committee of their employees who decide where that money is going to go. One of the grants that was made was to the Idaho School for the Deaf and the Blind in Gooding. This was an old school bus of theirs, and with that grant, they were able to turn it into the Ravenous Raptor Grill. And the students can now they take the Ravenous Raptor to community events, to games. It helps to generate money for the school, and it helps to provide job skills for the students who were working there. And so that was just a really cool grant that was given out through the Chobani Fund this year. A second one was in Horseshoe Bend. I just was in Horseshoe Bend in Boise County last week. I had the chance to visit that county. Boise County is geographically a really challenging county. I started the day up in Idaho City, and if the roads are clear and there's not really snowy, it's only about 25 miles or so to the other side of the county. But if the roads aren't good, and they weren't good that day, then it's almost 100-mile drive back to the other side of the county. You've got to come all the way back through Boise and Eagle. And so I made my way up to Garden Valley and then eventually to Horseshoe Bend, where I met with these two ladies who are on the board of the Horseshoe Bend Food Pantry. And there was a grant made from a Forever Idaho grant this year that paid for those stairs. And those stairs lead into the food pantry. That food pantry serves a community of about 1,000 people. And there are about 250 families in that area that are signed up to participate in the food pantry. Now, if each one of those families had on average of 3 people, it means that 3/4 of that community is utilizing that food pantry. And the access in and out of it was not very good. And so these two ladies were just thrilled and so proud of the fact that they could now provide a better way for people to utilize that. It's not so much about the stairs. It's not so much about that grant. It's about what is happening, what's being accomplished with those grants. And yes, it's just a staircase, but what it is providing 250 families with an opportunity to go in and utilize the food pantry and make sure that their families are food secure. And so when you think about the grants of the Community Foundation, they're not going out in $1 million grants. They're usually smaller grants that the fund holders are making recommendations on. They help to pay for pieces of equipment. They help to pay for new staircases. They help to pay for the operations of nonprofits in their communities. And I like to think of them all as little threads. But when those threads get woven together, which they do, they help make up the social fabric of Idaho communities. And that's what's happening with the nearly 1,800 grants that were made this past year through all of the funds that you have created. And so I'm going to pause there for a second, and I'm going to turn it over to Judy, who's going to walk you through some of the finances of the foundation for this year.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to have you join us here today. I'm just going to add a little bit more color to some of the numbers that Steve shared with you. As he noted, 2022 was one of our most impactful years. Total grants and distributions of almost 1,800 across multiple areas of impact, similar to ratio in prior years in our areas of impact and all across Idaho. And then it was also a strong year for philanthropists looking to make an impact by partnering with ICF. So even though the year was challenging, we saw our donors continue to rise to the occasion by looking to support Idaho nonprofits in a significant way. And you'll see there the most significant fund types that our donors are contributing towards. So moving on, talking about, by the end of 2022, as Steve mentioned, we had more than 670 charitable funds, and those are held in a variety of cash and investment options. So this is just a quick snapshot of the last 5 years. And while balances were down from the prior year due to market conditions, what's important to see here is continued increased activity. And the important takeaway here is not to dwell on the lower endowed balances, but to show the importance of our 5-year smoothing policy for available distributions. So by incorporating this methodology, we're able to continue consistent granting when it is needed most. Additional takeaways from this 5-year snapshot shows an increase in fund activity that is not endowed, which some donors find to be a more flexible option for them currently. So move on to the next slide. So speaking of those non-endowed options, we offer several investment choices depending on the goals of the particular donor. Unfortunately, these investments were also subject to market volatility for 2022, but primarily have sustained positive longer-term rates. So you'll see the various options that we have with our different target asset allocations. And then on the right, you see the rates of returns for those various options. And the least risky money market option had some modest returns ramping up towards the latter half of the year. So we'll move on to take a quick look at the endowed investment pool. Again, this is our target asset allocation for our endowed investment pool that has various investments inside of it. And again, this is a further demonstration of the difficult year for the markets. You'll see the interesting investment return chart there, where there's quite a bit of volatility. But while annual return rates have been a bit erratic over the last few years, this does tend to occur over market cycles. And taking a look at the longer term rates, you see a much more steady return. That's the green line across the center there, where you see it evening out. So taking a look at that, you see a much more steady return. We've not made changes to our target asset allocation and continue to stay the course as a long-term investor. This longer-term rate is additional demonstration of the smoothing process we employ to allow for more stable annual grant distributions. The process and rate were confirmed without change for 2023 at 4.25 over a 20-quarter period. And our investment subcommittee has an excellent track record and is one of the greatest reasons to work with ICF. So on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to Steve.
Thank you, Judy. So as part of this report today, we want to make sure we take a minute and talk about stewardship. First, again, thank you for partnering with the Community Foundation to help achieve your philanthropic goals. A couple of things we want to make sure that everyone is aware of. By now, you should have received in the mail your 2022 impact report. I hope you get a chance to look that over. What I hope that you take away from that is it's not about the Community Foundation. It's about you, because the Community Foundation is all about you, the fund holders, people who are coming together, who want to take care of their communities, and they're using, the Community Foundation as the vehicle to help them achieve their goals. And so there's lots of stories about fund holders who want to make that impact and make that difference. The second is to remind everyone that you have access to see the fund that you created, to see how it's doing 24/7. We have a donor portal that's accessible through the website. If you have had trouble either figuring out how to get onto that donor portal, or you need some training on how to use it, we are happy at the end. Just let us know, and we're happy to set up a time. We can train you so that you can have access 24/7 to know exactly what's happening. With that, sometimes we get financial and accounting questions where people don't understand their reports. They don't understand some of the things that Judy went over. If you would like to schedule a time to meet with us to talk, we would be happy to do that. We do get around the state. We are a statewide organization, and we get around all the time. We're having two donor events a couple weeks from now, one in Sandpoint and one in Coeur d'Alene. If you would like to be invited to future events, I'd really love to do that, let us know, and we will put you on the list so that when we come to your part of Idaho, we will invite you to those events. One of the other services that we provide that I think a lot of people don't realize is something that we call philanthropic advising. Lisa Berg, who is one of our senior philanthropic advisors, who is certified in 2164 certified, so that she has expertise in family philanthropy. We provide philanthropic advising. So what that means is that some people will say, look, I know exactly where I would love the distributions from my fund to go every year. But some people will say, I'm not quite sure. I would like to make a difference. I would like to make a difference in a certain area, education or healthcare or whatever that would be, but they're just not sure how to make that difference. And so they turn to us and they ask us to put together menus of various ways that they can make a difference. Lisa and her team put together those menus. We visit with those folks. We share those menus. We go over with them, what their grants and distributions would do. It's up to them still exactly if they would like to fund which parts of those menu, but some of our fund holders find that to be a very beneficial service that we provide. And then the last is, if you want to just meet and talk about your fund, to talk about your philanthropic goals, to see if it needs to be any changes, or we need to revisit what those goals are going to be, we are happy to sit down with you and go over all of that. So part of what we do is we get all over Idaho. In the last 15 months that I've had this job, I have been to most corners of the state. And what we see as we travel, and I'm sure that all of you see this in your communities, is that every single community in Idaho has both needs and opportunities. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. In terms of the needs, one of the sort of leading indicators of the needs is a report that the United Way puts out every year called the ALICE, or every couple of years called the ALICE report. And ALICE is an acronym that stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. And it's basically a report on the working poor of Idaho. And as you can see, about 12% of Idahoans live under the poverty line, but about another 28% fall into this ALICE category. And what it means is that they are struggling tremendously just to be able to pay for the basics. And if anything goes wrong with their budget, if they have any kind of unforeseen issue, then it usually tips them and they, just can't make ends meet. In some counties, it's as high as 64% of the people in those counties are living in ALICE or at the poverty line. And what we see is because of this, there are hunger issues, there are housing issues, there are daycare issues, there's all kinds of needs in Idaho. And this is probably one of the best explanations as to why. But conversely, there's also lots of opportunities. It's just so heartening. It's wonderful to travel all over the state and see how communities are trying to improve. They're trying to be resilient. They're trying to add things. This was a new playground that was built in American Falls in one of their parks downtown, and they were kind enough to give the Idaho Community Foundation a little recognition on that picnic table for some grants that they had received to help build that park. And so that's what we see. We see that there's an increasing number of needs and an increasing number of opportunities in this state. And so you think, okay, well, how does the charitable sector sort of, where do we stand? Because Idaho is a state that doesn't really like to rely and look towards the government as the solution, which means that the charitable sector has to be that much more robust. And so the other day I Googled, what are the most charitable states? What's the most charitable state in the country? And Wallet Hub does an analysis of this. They look at multiple factors, and it turns out that Utah is the most charitable state in America. Idaho ranked 31st, but that ranking is made up of two components. One is volunteering, where Idaho is 8th in the nation. But in terms of charitable giving, Idaho ranks 49th. Only Arizona is below us in terms of charitable giving. And that's not total charitable giving. It's done on a per capita basis. And so it's an equal ranking amongst all of the states. And for a state that has as many needs and has as many opportunities as Idaho, for our ranking to be 49th in terms of charitable giving, it means that we have to look, how do we make the charitable sector more robust than it currently is? And so great nonprofits do two things. One is that they provide high quality services that benefit their community. And we do that by setting up and managing all of those charitable funds and giving out grants across the state. But the second thing that great nonprofits do is they have to stand for something that's bigger than themselves. And for us, standing for something is helping Idaho move up in the rankings from 49th to something. We're probably not going to go to 2 or 3 or 4 anytime soon, but we've got to get closer to the middle if we ever hope to tackle some of the issues and opportunities that face us. And so the way that the Community Foundation is going to address that, the way that we're going to do our part, is that we mentioned a few minutes ago that we give out about $12.3 million in grants this past year. Our first goal is simply 20 by 40 for Idaho, and that means that we hope to be giving out, and we plan to be giving out at least $20 million annually by our 40th anniversary in November of 2028. Now, an $8 million a year increase in grants means that we have to grow the assets of the foundation by significantly more than that. It's a very ambitious goal, but it's what we believe that Idaho needs from us. Idaho, one of the reasons why we're 49th is because there simply aren't as many foundations in Idaho, and there aren't as many big foundations in Idaho. We have 17 foundations, private foundations per 100,000 people. Montana has 31 and Wyoming has 49, just to put it into perspective and to see what our neighbors are doing. And so this is really what the state of Idaho and the communities need from the Community Foundation, to be simply bigger than we are right now and be making significantly more in grants. For us to do that, what we have found is that $165 million later, and unfortunately, we're still one of the best kept secrets in Idaho. And so we need to tell our story more, because when people hear our story and they realize that we are there to help them meet their charitable goals, then that usually translates into more funds being created and eventually more grants going out the door. And so our second goal is 20 by 40 for Idaho. We need to tell our story at least 20,000 times per year through our 40th anniversary in 2028. This past year, we told our story about 14,000 times. So it's a 40% increase over where we are right now. It's a challenging goal. We have about 17 staff members. We have 18 board members, and we have 83,624 square miles to cover. And so telling that story, every time we tell this story to somebody who hadn't heard it before, we meet another 100 or 500 or 1,000 people who still haven't heard the Community Foundation story. So one of the things that I have so enjoyed in this job is getting around the state and meeting with people in local communities. I've now been to 31 of Idaho's 44 communities, and no matter what community I am in, I always get to meet with the same group of people. And I like to refer to those groups of people as the glue or the caretakers of their community. They are the folks who are on every board, they're on every committee, they're on every advisory panel. They're raising, they're baking cookies for the elementary school's bake sale. They're selling tickets on a Friday night at the high school football game. It doesn't matter what is going on in that community. They are there helping to make sure that their community is sustaining and thriving. And so this is the group of people that we need to partner with on an even greater scale if we hope to achieve those very ambitious goals that we have set out for ourselves. The good news is that everybody who's on this call today, I consider you to be in that same category. You are the glue, you are the caretakers of your community, and you are making it happen. And we are honored to be able to partner. And so if you want to help some more, we would love your help. And there's a few things that you can do. You've already set up a fund. If you'd like to talk about increasing the size of that fund, or perhaps even setting up another fund to be able to accomplish some other charitable goal, we would love to sit down with you and discuss that. Second is that if you know someone who you think really should know about the Community Foundation, they're in the same mindset, they're the community caretakers, but they just haven't heard of us, we would love for you to introduce us to some of those folks, and we would be happy to sit down and chat with them about, can we help them achieve their charitable goals? And then the last is to help tell our story. We send out newsletters, we send out social media posts, we send out the impact report, all kinds. And we hope that you'll read those. We hope that you read about your fellow Idahoans and what they're doing to take care of their communities and to share those stories, because we can't share them enough. And there just simply aren't enough people who know that ICF is here. And so speaking of stories, I'm going to finish with one last story that I just love. When I started here last year, I started to go through the list of funds that had been created with the foundation and to learn about the people who set them up, to learn about what it is that they were trying to accomplish with those funds. And I came across this one fund called the Hokey Pokey Scholarship Fund. I'm like, I have got to look into this and see what it is. And so the story is that in 1941, in the Ram Bar in the Sun Valley Village, there was a band called the Sun Valley Trio, and they would play there. And two of the gentlemen who were in that band had heard about a British folk song called the Hokey Cokey. And they decided that they were going to write their own American version, their own Idaho version of that song. And they wrote the Hokey Pokey, the one that you are familiar with. And they sat on it for about 8 years. And then one night in 1949, they busted out that tune, and the crowd at the Ram Bar went wild. They loved it. They had a great time with that song, and it became very popular. And in 1951, they decided to release the song commercially. Well, over time, that produced, royalties to the people who wrote the song. And when one of the gentlemen passed, his children decided, they looked at their father and they looked at his legacy, and they said, Dad has always been taking care of this community, and he would want to continue to take care of this community. So rather than accept those royalties themselves, they decided to create a fund with ICF. And now the royalties from the commercial use of the song, the Hokey Pokey, help fund scholarships for second-year music majors at the College of Southern Idaho in Twin Falls. Taking care of your community, that is what it's all about. And so I will stop there, and I will unshare my screen and see if any of you have any questions that we can answer for you today. Is the sharing stopped, Jennifer?
Yep.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? And if you want, you can go up to the top screen and it should have a little hand raise, or you can just unmute yourself and ask away. No? Well, if we don't have any questions now, I'll make you a deal. If you suddenly tonight think of a question or an issue or something you want to bring up to the Community Foundation, and you sit up in bed and you go, I remembered what I wanted to ask them, please send us an email, reach out by phone, whatever it is. We are more than happy to answer any of your questions, sit down, visit with you, resolve any issues or questions that you might have. So if there are no questions, again, let me thank you so much for partnering with us. We couldn't do this without you. There would be no Community Foundation without you. And we're going to continue to grow this Community Foundation because, as I said before, that is what Idaho needs from all of us, for the caretakers to continue to take care of their communities. So thanks, folks, and stay warm. And let's hope that spring is just around the corner.
Thanks for joining us today, everybody. Good to see everyone.